I only needed shelter. But that old oak beam was hiding my family's past.
She was 19 and homeless. No home, no family, no savings. Just a canvas bag and $4 she had counted twice before leaving. And with that amount, she bought a rag doll maker's shed near Salem, Forsyth County, North Carolina. In 1987, after the forgotten place fell off county maps, the roof leaked through rotten cedar boards. The floor sagged beneath old wooden beams. Forsyth County condemned it in 1986, with demolition planned for the following winter season. Inside the shed stood a forgotten stuffing baling press with a hollow oak support beam, unopened for decades, hiding something that would quietly change Margot's life. Before we continue, if stories like this mean something to you, hit subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Margot Elaine Whitaker had been preserving things her whole life without knowing it. She was raised in a narrow farmhouse outside Winston-Salem, where broken buttons were saved in jars and torn fabric was folded instead of discarded. Her father repaired old furniture after work, and he taught her that worn objects were not useless. They were simply waiting for someone patient enough to understand them. The person who understood that best was her great-aunt Clara Whitaker, an elderly woman with silver hair always pinned beneath a faded blue scarf. Clara made cloth dolls from linen scraps, old dresses, and cotton batting. Every Saturday morning, Margot rode her bicycle to Clara's small workshop, where sunlight fell across wooden tables covered with thread spools and hand-drawn patterns. Clara never hurried. She showed Margot how to wash linen in warm water before cutting it, how to draw patterns along the grain so the seams would hold, and how to push soft stuffing into tiny arms using a smooth wooden stick. The dolls had no painted eyes or mouths. Clara believed a blank face allowed every child to find their own story there. One afternoon, while Margot struggled with a crooked stitch, Clara placed a needle beside her hand and said, "The smallest stitches are the ones that keep something together when nobody is looking." Margot remembered those words because Clara never spoke about success. She spoke about care. Clara died when Margot was 16 after the funeral. Her handmade patterns disappeared from the farmhouse attic, along with the old wooden sewing box, the linen scraps, and the dolls Margot had helped create. Her stepmother called them clutter and cleared the room before Margot could return from school. Her father changed after Clara's death. He became quieter, tired from his illness, and dependent on the woman he had married late in life. Margaret Whitaker, Margot's stepmother, kept the house orderly in a way that felt less like comfort and more like control. Every drawer had a place. Every photograph had a position. Every memory that did not belong to her was slowly moved aside. When Margot's father died in early October, the house became unfamiliar within days. The locks were changed before the flowers from the funeral had wilted. Margot stood on the front porch with her father's old canvas bag at her feet, while her stepmother watched from behind the glass door. Inside the bag were 2 shirts, a small notebook, and the last $4 she owned. "You are leaving this house today." 8 words. Her stepmother did not shout. She did not need to. She simply stood beside the locked door while the police officer in the driveway listened to a story about a disruptive daughter who refused to leave. Margot looked toward the window where her father used to wave when she returned from Clara's workshop. The curtain moved slightly, but no one opened the door. The first week after that was measured by places where she could remain unseen. She slept behind a laundromat in Greensboro beneath a folded cardboard sheet until a worker found her at sunrise and quietly offered coffee. She spent 3 nights in Charlotte at a bus station using her canvas bag as a pillow. She walked through Asheville with 17 cents left, then rode east after a church volunteer paid for a meal and a ticket. 6 weeks passed between the locked door and the day she found the advertisement. The money disappeared slowly. $4 became 2. 2 became coins collected from sidewalk cracks and vending machines that had returned change. She washed dishes for one night at a diner in Hickory. She carried boxes behind a small grocery store in Statesville. She never asked for pity because Clara had taught her that dignity was something a person carried even when everything else was gone. One rainy afternoon, Margot sat inside the public library in Winston-Salem, warming her hands near a vent beneath a window. She was searching through old newspaper advertisements because she needed a place where the cost was not measured in rent. A small classified notice appeared near the bottom of a page. Historic craft shed. Former cloth doll workshop. $4. Buyer responsible for repairs. Below it was a county office address and a note that the property was scheduled for removal. She read the advertisement 3 times. A forgotten shed. A craft she knew. A place nobody wanted. The next morning, Margot folded the newspaper clipping into her father's notebook. She used her last coins for a bus ticket towards Salem, carrying only the canvas bag, the notebook, and the memory of Clara's quiet hands guiding hers over a piece of linen. She did not know whether the shed would save her. She only knew it was the first door that had opened. The bus left Margot at the edge of Salem just after sunrise, with a thin layer of frost covering the fields beside the highway. She walked the remaining miles with her canvas bag pressed against her coat, following the county directions written in faded ink on the deed notice. The morning temperature was 18 degrees Fahrenheit, cold enough that each breath disappeared quickly above the empty road. The night before she had slept in a hay barn outside a small farming community after the owner found her walking after dark. The farmer did not ask many questions. He pointed toward the barn, handed her an old wool blanket and said there was a coffee pot by the kitchen door if she woke early. She spent the night listening to mice moving through the hay and the slow settling sounds of the wooden walls. By the time she reached Salem, her boots were damp and her fingers ached from carrying the bag. The town was quiet, with old buildings standing along streets that had kept their shape for generations. She passed several places that seemed untouched by hurried years: Winkler Bakery with its brick oven and warm bread smell, the Salem Tavern with its painted shutters, the Moravian book and gift shop with its narrow windows, the local hardware store with wooden shelves visible through the glass, and the village cafe where people still gathered before work. She did not stop at any of them. The county clerk's office sat in a brick building near the courthouse square. Margot pushed open the heavy door and stepped into a room filled with the smell of paper, dust, and floor polish. Behind a wooden counter sat a woman in her late 50s with grey curls tucked behind one ear and a small silver watch fastened tightly around her wrist. A brass nameplate on the desk read, Evelyn Harwood, County Records Clerk. The woman looked up from a stack of documents. "You are here about the Whitaker shed?" Margot nodded. Evelyn studied the folder in front of her, then looked at the young woman standing with a canvas bag instead of a suitcase. "You understand this property has no working utilities?" "Yes, ma'am." "You understand the county has declared it unsafe?" "Yes, ma'am." "You understand repairs and taxes become your responsibility the moment you sign?" "Yes, ma'am." "You understand the county will not restore the building if something fails?" "Yes, ma'am." Evelyn held the papers for a moment longer than necessary. Most people who came for abandoned properties were looking for cheap land. They usually asked about resale value or what could be removed. Margot only asked where the key was. The clerk placed the deed forward. "You are sure?" Margot looked down at the signature line. "Yes, ma'am." The transfer was completed with a brass county stamp pressed firmly into the paper. The sound of the seal closing was small but final. Evelyn slid the document across the desk and wrote directions on the back of an old envelope. "Take Old Mill Road until the walnut trees begin. Then turn on to Carter Hollow Lane. The shed sits beyond the creek crossing." Margot folded the deed carefully. Before she could leave, Evelyn touched the folder again. "Your last name is Whitaker." Margot looked up. "Yes." The clerk became still. "My grandfather knew a Clara Whitaker." The name landed differently than the others she had heard in recent months. "She made dolls," Evelyn continued. "Plain cloth ones. No faces. Margot's hand tightened around the deed. She was my great-aunt. Evelyn removed her glasses and cleaned them slowly with the edge of her sleeve. Your family thought that Shed was gone years ago. Margot did not know what to say. The clerk reached into the folder and removed a small paper tag attached to the original property records. Clara came here every spring to renew the craft permit. She stopped coming in 1982. Why? Evelyn looked toward the window. I never found out. The walk to the shed took nearly an hour. Old Mill Road narrowed into a gravel path where fallen leaves covered the edges. Carter Hollow Lane curved between fields and patches of forest. A neighbour named Thomas Bell was repairing a fence beside the road, wearing a brown jacket patched at one elbow. He lifted his hand when he saw Margot. You heading to the old doll place? Yes. Thomas looked toward the trees. Nobody has been there in years. His old black-and-white dog walked over, sniffed Margot's boots, then sat beside her. The walnut trees appeared near the creek, their bare branches stretching above the road like old hands. Beyond them stood the shed. It was smaller than Margot imagined. The structure measured roughly 20 feet by 30 feet, built from weathered oak boards with a steep cedar roof that had collapsed along one side. A stone chimney leaned slightly above the back wall. Near the entrance hung a faded wooden sign with only a few worn letters remaining. Doll work. The building looked less abandoned than forgotten, as if everyone had simply stepped away. Margot unlocked the door using the key Evelyn gave her. The wood resisted at first, then opened with a long dry sound. Inside, the air carried decades of sealed dust and old cotton. The front room was dark except for narrow beams of morning light entering through gaps in the boards. The floor was uneven beneath her boots. Old fabric scraps covered one corner, and faded doll faces painted by hand rested among piles of yellowed stuffing. Some smiled. Some had only the beginning of a sketch. The back room smelled of cedar, mildew, and old thread. She touched a wooden table near the wall. A layer of dust covered it, but underneath was the smooth surface Clara's hands had once used. Her fingers found old cuts and marks left by tools. Near sunset. The temperature dropped quickly. The shed had no heat, no water, and no bed. Margot unfolded her blanket on the floor beside the workroom and placed her canvas bag beneath her head. The night sounds came slowly, wind through the boards, the creek moving beyond the trees, the soft creaking of a building that had stood empty for years. Margot closed her eyes. The house had been waiting for her. The first 3 days were not spent repairing the shed. They were spent listening. Margot learned where the floorboards complained beneath her weight and where they remained firm. She carried water from the old hand-dug well behind the building, lowering the metal bucket slowly because the rope had begun to fray near the knot. The outhouse stood crooked behind a line of walnut trees, but the roof still held, and she cleared the fallen leaves away before using it. Each morning she walked the property before touching any tool. The land had its own sounds. The creek rose slightly after rain. The chimney released small pieces of loose mortar when the wind moved through it. The back corner of the floor made a hollow sound beneath her left boot. That sound stayed with her. On the 4th morning she walked into town to find supplies. The hardware store sat between 2 older buildings on Main Street, its front window filled with metal buckets, lanterns, rope, and handwritten price cards. Inside, shelves reached almost to the ceiling, and the air smelled of cedar shavings and machine oil. The owner was a thin man named Walter Pierce. He had a missing front tooth and wore a brown wool vest with a pencil tucked behind his ear. He was sorting screws into small wooden drawers when Margot entered. "You are the young woman from the Whitaker place." Margot nodded. "I need tools." Walter looked at the list she had written from memory. "Most people buy a property like that and start by tearing things out. I do not want to tear it out. Walter studied her for a moment. What do you want to do? Keep it. He looked down at the list again. Then we will start with keeping. Walter opened an old account book behind the counter. I can put supplies on credit. Margot shook her head. I cannot promise when I can pay. Neither could half the farmers who built this town. He closed the book. Bring it back when you can. Before she left, he gave her a thin manual titled Repairing Historic Wooden Structures. It belonged to my father. He marked the useful parts. The first supplies were modest. A chimney brush, $8.50. A hand scraper, $4.25. A bag of lime mortar, $12. A replacement hammer handle, $3.23, $335, $1975, NOF, $375, NOF, $375, NOK, $337. A pair of work gloves, $6. A coil of rope, $5.40. Nothing arrived easily. Everything required patience. The chimney was the first serious repair. Margot climbed onto the roof with a borrowed ladder and examined the damage. The upper bricks had dark stains from years of trapped moisture. When she removed the loose sections, grey flakes of creosote fell from the interior lining. The chimney had not drawn properly in years. For 3 afternoons, she cleaned it from top to bottom. She tied a brush to a rope and pulled it through the flue repeatedly until the loose build-up stopped falling. She scraped hardened creosote from the firebox with a metal tool and carried each bucket of debris outside. The work took nearly 6 hours each day. Her hands smelled of soot even after washing. The first fire came on the evening of the 5th day. She placed dry wood inside the fireplace, opened the damper, and watched the first small flame take hold. For several minutes, smoke curled uncertainly near the opening. Then it rose, cleanly. The warmth reached the room slowly. Margot sat on the floor with a small pot of soup warming beside the fire. It was the first hot meal she had cooked in a place that belonged to her. She ate carefully. Not because there was not enough, because she had learned not to waste anything. The workroom became her next question. She did not rush through it. Clara had taught her that old things revealed themselves when handled with care. There was a wooden cutting table with dozens of tiny knife marks from fabric patterns, a shelf of empty thread spools arranged by colour, a box of rusted sewing needles wrapped in cloth, a hand-painted tin holding faded buttons, a wooden stuffing tool worn smooth at one end, a stack of linen patterns tied together with cotton string, and near the back wall stood the old stuffing baling press. The press was larger than she expected. It had been built from heavy oak beams and iron fittings. The machine was designed to compress cotton, batting into manageable bundles before shipment. The metal parts were orange with rust, but the structure remained strong. Margot spent 2 days cleaning around it. The third morning, she noticed something unusual. When she tapped the main oak support beam, the sound changed halfway across. The left side sounded solid. The right side sounded hollow. She tapped again. A faint wooden echo answered. She checked the beam's weight by pressing against it. It shifted slightly, but not like damaged wood. Like a piece designed to move. Near the end of the beam was a circular cedar disc almost hidden beneath years of dust and oil. Margot cleaned the edge carefully with a small brush. The disc was not part of the original construction. It was a cover. She sat beside the machine for a long time before touching it. There was no excitement in her hands, only caution. She remembered Clara's words about small stitches and hidden strength. Some things were not meant to be forced open. She loosened the cedar disc slowly. Behind it was a narrow wooden compartment. Inside rested several wrapped packages covered in old cloth. The first package held tools, not ordinary tools. They were Clara's tools. A small curved needle case carved from walnut, a pair of sewing scissors with a bone handle, a wooden pattern wheel, a measuring tool marked in Clara's handwriting. Margot held each piece as if it could break from being remembered. The second package contained materials, bundles of linen, silk ribbon, small jars of natural dyes, a collection of handwritten notes about cloth preparation and stitching methods. The third item was a small tin box. Inside were old coins, folded papers, and an envelope with her family name written across the front. She did not open the letter. Not yet. The money came next. Margot spread the contents on the work table and counted slowly. There were old silver dollars, Liberty $half, Mercury dimes, and wheat pennies mixed among newer currency that had been carefully folded. The total was not a fortune. It was $21,600. Beside the money was a small military medal. The engraving showed the year 1944. She turned it over and found a name she recognized from Clara's family records. The room became quiet. The discovery was not a treasure chest. It was a careful decision left behind by someone who had trusted time. That evening, Margot did not read the letter. She carried a blanket outside and sat beside the creek. The water moved over stones in the dark. Above her, the walnut branches crossed against the sky. She held the unopened envelope in her hands and waited until she was ready. The house had been waiting for her. The next morning arrived with a thin frost covering the grass outside the shed. Margot carried the envelope to the work table before sunrise. She did not open it immediately. She studied the handwriting first. The letters leaned slightly to the right, with careful spaces between each word. Clara had written the same way on every pattern sheet Margot remembered from childhood. The same steady hand that had marked seam allowances and stitching lines had written the name on the envelope. Margot ran her thumb over the paper once. Then she opened it. The paper inside had been folded along the original creases. My dear one, whoever you are, if you're reading this, then the old press has opened for you, and the shed has found careful hands again. My name is Clara Whitaker. I built this small workshop with my husband Samuel after we moved back to Salem in 1951. I'm writing this because my doctor told me my heart condition will not allow me many more years of work. Dr. Helen Morris of Charlotte diagnosed me with congestive heart failure in March of 1981, and I have spent these years preparing for the day when someone kind would find what I left behind. My family line began with Anna Whitaker, born in 1812 near Bethania, North Carolina, who learned cloth work from Moravian women in the old settlements. Her daughter Ruth Whitaker, born in 1845 in Salem, kept the patterns through the difficult years after the Civil War. Ruth's son Elijah, born in 1878 in Winston-Salem, repaired tools and built the first stuffing press used by our family. My father, Thomas Whitaker, born in 1910 in Forsyth County, taught me that a useful object should be repaired before it is replaced. I continued the work here until the trade officially closed on October 14, 1982. For more than 30 years, this room has been silent. That silence was not because the work failed. It was because sometimes a craft must wait for the right person. Samuel was taken from me during his service in the Second World War. He was lost in France in 1944, and the medal you found belonged to him. He loved this workshop because he believed every handmade object carried the patience of the person who made it. If you continue this work, remember these things. Wash linen before cutting so the fibers settle. Keep the water near 100 degrees Fahrenheit when preparing old cloth, because extreme heat weakens the threads. Mix natural dye slowly, using 1 part dye concentrate to 4 parts water when creating gentle colors. Allow treated fabric to rest for at least 12 hours before stitching. Use small even stitches, no wider than 1/8 of an inch, because strength is created by consistency rather than force. The money hidden here was not saved for comfort. It was saved for continuation. Materials cost money. Wood costs money. Time costs something too. But inheritance is not measured by what one person keeps. It is measured by what one person chooses to protect. The faceless dolls were always my favourite. People asked why I never painted eyes or smiles on them. They thought I forgot. I did not forget. A face tells someone who they should be. A blank face allows them to decide. The doll waiting in this room was filled with hundreds of silk ribbons. On each ribbon, I wrote a wish, a blessing, or a quiet hope for someone I would never meet. The doll has no face because nobody owns the right to decide whose story belongs there. If you are lonely, make something. If you are uncertain, repair something. If you are afraid, begin with one careful stitch. The house is not empty. It has been waiting. You're welcome here. With all my gratitude, Clara Elizabeth Whitaker, October 14th, 1982. Margot read the letter twice. The second time was slower. When she finished, she folded the paper along the original creases, exactly as Clara had done before placing it inside the envelope. She returned it to the table beside the tools, not hidden away, but kept where the morning light could reach it. The letter had mentioned a marker. Margot walked through the back door and followed the narrow path behind the shed. Near the walnut trees, beneath a layer of moss and fallen leaves, she found a flat stone with a small carved symbol matching the mark on Clara's old pattern papers. A simple needle crossing a line of thread. She brushed the surface clean with her glove. There was no name, only the craft mark. That afternoon, she returned to the workshop and chose one object from Clara's belongings. The old oil lamp. The glass was cloudy, and the brass had darkened with age. Margot cleaned it carefully, filled it with oil, and struck a match. The flame appeared slowly, not bright, not dramatic, just steady. Over the following weeks, the people who had crossed her path began appearing again in small ways. Walter Pierce at the hardware store left a bundle of sandpaper beside the counter and refused payment. The old place needs more than wood, he said. Thomas Bell, the neighbour from Carter Hollow Lane, repaired a loose section of fence near the creek without mentioning it. Evelyn Harwood at the county office saved an old map showing the original property boundaries and slipped it into Margot's mailbox. Even the farmer who had given her the hay barn night left a jar of preserved peaches near the shed door after hearing she had a working fireplace. Small things, things that could have been ignored, things that stayed. There are moments when a person remembers a kindness years after receiving it because the kindness arrived during a time when there was very little left to hold on to. What is one small kindness someone once gave you that you still remember today? That evening, Margot placed Clara's tools beside her blanket before sleeping. The medal, the letter, and the old walnut needle case rested on the table nearby. For the first time in many months, she slept without wondering where she would wake. The first snow arrived on December 3rd, 1987. It fell for 6 hours and covered the shed roof with 4 inches of wet white weight. Margot stood outside that morning watching water drip through the damaged cedar boards and knew the roof could not wait until spring. She read Walter's repair manual 3 times before lifting a single board. The roof measured approximately 20 feet by 30 feet. She calculated the materials carefully. 12 bundles of cedar shingles, enough felt underlayment for 700 square feet, and nearly 5 pounds of galvanized nails. She wrote each number in Clara's old notebook because guessing was how people wasted what they had. Walter placed an old roofing hatchet across the counter when she returned for supplies. My brother used this. Margot reached for her wallet. No, she looked up. He would have wanted it used. The man who helped her most was Harold Voss, a retired roofer who lived 2 roads beyond the creek. He had a bent left finger from 40 years of hammerwork and a habit of checking every measurement twice. "I do not need payment," Harold said. "I cannot accept that." "You can. By doing it correctly." The roof took 11 days. They replaced damaged sections one at a time, checking the sister rafters beneath the shingles before covering them again. Harold showed her how to snap a chalk line straight across uneven boards and how to drive nails with 3 controlled strokes instead of 1 heavy strike. "That nail's proud." Margot looked at the raised nail head. "Pull it." Harold nodded. "Good." They worked through cold mornings and short afternoons. By mid-December, the last cedar shingle was secured, and the sound of rain changed. It landed softly. Not inside. Outside. January brought colder nights. The chimney looked stronger from a distance, but close inspection revealed spalling bricks where moisture had entered for years. The mortar crumbled into powder beneath Margot's fingers. She removed damaged sections carefully and rebuilt them using hydraulic lime mixed with fireclay in a 5-to-1 ratio. The work required patience because the materials behaved differently from modern cement. They needed time to breathe. For 3 weeks, she worked in temperatures that remained in the 20s Fahrenheit. Every 15 minutes, she stopped to warm her hands. Her fingers went numb even through gloves, and some mornings she sat beside the cold fireplace before beginning, waiting for enough feeling to return. The final test came late in January. Margot placed dry oak inside the fireplace and lit a small fire. She watched the smoke move upward. No hesitation. No dark cloud. The chimney drew clean. The room filled with warmth that belonged there. The floors were the next challenge. Years of moisture had darkened the white pine planks almost black. When Margot cleaned beneath the old rugs, she found hand-cut rose-head nails still holding the boards in place. She rented a random orbit sander from Walter's store for $14 per day. The work was slow. The first pass used 80 grit paper to remove the damaged surface. The second used 120 grit to smooth the grain. The final pass used 220 grit until the pine felt almost soft beneath her fingertips. She applied 3 coats of oil finish, allowing each layer to absorb before adding the next. Between coats, she waited 48 hours. The color changed gradually. The boards moved from dark, tired brown toward a deep honey tone with hints of mahogany. One morning, after several days of rain, Margot woke with no strength to continue. She walked to the marsh behind the property and sat beside the water. A great blue heron stood motionless near the reeds. For nearly an hour, she watched it. She did no work that day. She returned before sunset and swept the floor anyway. The windows were the last opening between the shed and the winter air. There were 8 in total. 3 had no glass remaining. 4 held cracked panes that trembled whenever the wind moved. 1 original pane from 1788 still survived in the back room, and Margot protected it carefully instead of replacing it. She cleaned each frame, repaired the wood, and restored the glass using DAP 33 glazing putty worked between her fingers until it reached the right consistency. The sash cords were replaced with 1/4-inch cotton cord. Margot tied each counterweight using a figure-8 knot, the same method described in Walter's old repair manual. The final window took 2 days. It was the smallest one beside the work table where Clara had once cut fabric. When Margot finished setting the last piece of glass, she stepped back. A chickadee landed on the walnut branch outside. It remained there for several seconds, looking through the clear pane. Then it flew away. The walls were the final winter repair. Margot removed the damaged sections near the chimney and found hand-split oak lath beneath the old plaster. The first 3 patches failed. 1 cracked overnight. Another separated from the wall after a week. The third held until the next cold morning. Walter gave her an old paper bag from the back of his storage room. Horsehair plaster. Inside was horsehair. His father had saved decades earlier for restoration work. Margot mixed lime plaster slowly, working the material until it held together without becoming heavy. The first coat was scored after application to create a surface for the next layer. The brown coat was applied at 3/8 of an inch and allowed to cure for 72 hours. The final finish coat measured about 1/8 of an inch. She repaired the wall beside the fireplace, one careful section at a time. When she finished, she ran her palm across the surface. "These patches will hold another 100 years," she said it quietly, as if the room itself deserved the promise. The shed became known again, not through announcements, but through small arrivals. Doris Bell owned the cafe near the town square. She had a silver streak running through her dark hair and always wore flour on one sleeve from baking before sunrise. She began leaving paper bags on Margot's doorstep. Bread, apples, a jar of soup. When Margot tried to pay, Doris shook her head. "When the shop reopens, pay me in candles." She smiled and walked away before Margot could argue. In March, a teenage boy arrived on a green Schwinn bicycle with a splitting maul tied across the back rack. His name was Caleb Pierce, Walter's grandson. He stood awkwardly near the fence. "My grandfather said you might need this." Margot looked at the maul. "I can pay you." He shook his head. "No." Then he looked toward the shed. "My mother said, about your grandfather." That was all he explained, but he came back the following weekend to help clear fallen branches. Reverend Boyd passed the property every morning on his walk to the church. He was an older man with a black coat polished smooth from years of wear and a silver watch chain visible beneath his collar. He never entered. He simply lifted his hat when he passed. One morning, he stopped at the gate and offered 4 words, "May your hands heal." Then he continued down the road. Margot postponed the cellar until February 11th. The rest of the building needed stability first. The cellar entrance was hidden beneath a warped wooden panel near the back room. When she opened it, she found 7 granite steps descending into a space measuring 12 feet by 15 feet. The floor was fieldstone. The walls were cool and dry. At the center sat a dressed granite slab marked with the same small craft symbol Clara had used. Margot brushed away dirt from the edges. She did not lift it. Some things, she had learned, could remain closed until the right moment. Near the 3rd step, she noticed a small oak box wedged between the stones. Inside was a brass key. The bow of the key was shaped like a tiny version of the heritage craft symbol. Beneath it was a tintype photograph. The image showed a young woman standing outside the cottage in 1903. She held a cloth doll pattern in one hand and a small carving tool in the other. Margot stared at the face. The resemblance was impossible to ignore. The same shape of the eyes, the same curve of the mouth. On the back, written in faded ink, were the words, "Anna Whitaker, daughter of Thomas Whitaker. Edge 25, summer of 1903. Margot carried the key upstairs and placed it on the mantel. She did not know what it opened. She decided that was enough for one day. By March, the snow disappeared from the fields. The creak grew louder. Small green shoots appeared beside the walnut trees, and the branches filled with pale catkins moving in the spring wind. Margot knew the shed was ready for more than survival. But she was not ready to rush the craft. She decided she would not begin making full dolls that spring. Instead, she would spend only 1 coin from the hidden money on materials. She would practice with small pieces of linen. She would learn the stitches again. She would allow her hands to remember. The workshop did not need to prove anything. Neither did she. The house was patient. So was she. 2 winters later, in December 2024, Margot placed the first finished doll on the work table. She had spent months preparing. The linen had been washed and rested. The seams were measured carefully. The stuffing was placed slowly until the shape became gentle rather than perfect. The doll had no painted face. Only smooth cloth. Only possibility. She wrapped it in brown paper and placed it near the window where Clara had once worked. The restored interior was simple. The pine floors carried a warm glow. The chimney held steady through winter storms. The repaired windows let morning light cross the tables where old patterns waited beside new ones. Nothing looked new. That was the point. The shed had become a place where old things were allowed to continue. The brass key remained on the mantel until a cold afternoon in December, when Margot finally walked outside to the oldest walnut tree on the property. The tree had a narrow metal plate attached beneath a layer of bark. The key fit. Inside the small hidden compartment was a folded 48-star American flag and another letter wrapped in oilcloth. The handwriting belonged to Anna Whitaker. The letter was dated June 6, 1991, 91, 3, 91, this. 933333. Not during the First World War. It spoke of her son Thomas serving overseas and of the fear carried by families waiting for news from distant battlefields. She wrote that clothwork had helped her survive uncertain days because every stitch gave her hands something honest to do. The flag had been folded carefully for more than a century. Margot did not display it as decoration. She carried it to a cemetery where generations of Whitakers had been buried. On November 11th, 2024, Veterans Day, she placed the military medal beside Samuel's name and held the flag there in silence. The money from the press remained mostly untouched. Margot used 3 silver coins for materials during the first year of reopening. 2 more coins helped repair the cafe's old display cabinet. The remaining money was sealed inside a small wooden box beneath the work table. A note on top said, "For the next one, the shop reopened quietly." There was no announcement, no newspaper article, only an index card placed on Doris's cafe corkboard. Cloth dolls, repair lessons, handmade pieces, by appointment. Within months, the mailing list held more than 40 names. People who wanted to learn, people who wanted to remember, people who believed old skills still had a place. One spring morning, Caleb returned carrying a wooden sign carved from walnut. He had spent weeks shaping the letters by hand. The sign read, "Whitaker Doll Workshop, Daughters." Margot touched the carved words. "You made this," Caleb shrugged. The shop needed a name. She hung it beside the door. Not above it, beside it, because Clara had never believed one person should stand alone. Years later, when Margot sat at the same table where the old patterns had waited, she began a letter of her own. She used Clara's opening words. "My dear one, whoever you are." She wrote about the winter when she arrived with $4. She wrote about the people who helped without asking for anything back. She wrote about the importance of leaving something useful behind. And she wrote that a place does not become meaningful because it is expensive or admired. It becomes meaningful because someone chooses to care for it. The house had been waiting for her. The old rag doll maker's shed waited. It had waited through empty winters, through dust, through forgotten years, and through the quiet return of careful hands. Now it waited for the next person who needed a place to begin again. Rag doll maker's shed waits. It has always waited. In the county clerk's office. Inside an old wooden desk drawer. Evelyn Harwood kept one small reminder of the day Margot signed the deed. A $4 bill. She never spent it. She wrote the date on the back and placed it beneath the drawer lining, not because it was valuable, because sometimes the smallest things are proof that a door once opened.